Hello and welcome. I'm Laura Briggs with the Vegan Fitness Runner podcast, where I'll be talking all things running, health and fitness, and what it means to be an active vegan.
My next guests are Dr. Clare Day and Dr. Daisy Lund, two plant-based health professionals working as NHS GPs in London. They have their own podcast, In a Nutshell, which aims to improve nutritional education about the benefits of a whole foods, plant-based diet for individual and planetary health. In this episode, we tackle debunking many of the common plant-based myths and misconceptions. Clare and Daisy, hello and welcome to the show. How are you both?
Great. Thanks for having us on the podcast, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Very welcome. It's really nice to have two people talking to me. Normally I'm just talking to one. So today is a special day having two experts on the podcast. You guys really know your stuff about nutrition and vegan, plant-based eating. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about myths maybe that people hear quite commonly about vegan eating. I'm going to kick off by asking you a question I suppose that most vegans will hear a lot of the time, which is, where on earth do you get your protein? How do you survive as a vegan? You obviously don't get enough protein.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll start by talking about this. Feel free to chip in, Daisy. But I mean, I think it's really obvious, isn't it, that you can be a successful athlete and be vegan. In fact, a lot of athletes actually prefer it. So we know that it's possible to build muscle and things like that on a vegan diet. Maybe it's good for me to talk a little bit about if I was talking to someone as a GP and, doing a little cruise over what they were eating, what would I say to them about how to increase their sources of protein from vegan food? And I think, the main areas are going to be the things that we always talk about with a whole food plant-based diet. So it's your nuts, your seeds, your beans, and then proteins that are made essentially from beans, often things like tofu, textured vegetable protein, which is, things like soya mince. But then we've got other ones that are becoming more popular now, like things made from seitan, which is gluten, and corn as well, which is, I think it's made from mushrooms, the vegan version, essentially, and using microbes. So these are really good, what we'd call high quality sources of protein. And when you look at the ones like tofu and corn, they're actually really easy to digest as well. I think the myth that we're talking about here is that when people get really into thinking about food, they think about things like amino acids, and they learn that proteins are made from amino acids. There are 20 of them. 9 of them are essential. That means that your body essentially can't make those amino acids. So you have to get them from a food source, and they need to be in that form. There's a lot of animal proteins which are boasted as being complete proteins. That means that they contain all 9 of the essential amino acids. Now, there are some vegan plant-based sources of protein that contain all 9, but there aren't as many. Soya would be one, and hemp seeds is another one. But the good news is that all plants contain protein, and they will all contain amino acids in varying quantities. So we come back to something that we say a lot about vegan plant-based diets, is that it's all about eating a variety. And as long as you eat a variety, and as long as you aim for something like, if you're starting out, you might look at the amount of protein that's in a food. As long as you aim for starting for about 20 grams of protein in a meal, you're going to hit, if you're having 3 meals a day, you're going to hit easily the sort of average protein requirement. If you're training for something, or if you're older, there are recommendations that you need to eat more protein. But we can maybe talk, as we go along, about some of the ways that you might top up those protein sources, because, even people who do a lot of exercise, there's no rule that you only have to have 3 meals a day. You might want to have 4 meals a day, and I think that's completely fine. Other people, like myself, sort of go to work with, I've always got sort of nuts dried fruits, fruit bars, things like that, which are probably ways of topping up my own protein sources, as well as doing what I would think were sort of 3 pretty good meals a day.
Is it true to say as well, Claire, that a lot of people are getting way more protein than we actually need anyway in our day-to-day diet, but regardless of kind of meat eater or vegan, that in, the modern developed society we live in, that actually it's not something that most people would struggle with anyway?
I think that's absolutely right, Laura. I mean, what we do know is that in Western countries, UK, USA, Canada, we're essentially overeaters. And there is that reassurance that if you're eating enough calories and you're getting those from a variety of sources, it's really, really unlikely that you're managing to avoid the basic protein requirement. Now, it's definitely the case if you analyse the diet of a vegan and the average meat eater, or at least when they did it in something like the EPIC Oxford study, which was, data from a few years ago, food studies, that if you're a meat eater, you're going to be overeating protein even more than if you're vegetarian or vegan. But vegans were still making, a decent amount. And I think what we also say when we look at these historic studies is that we know so much more about plant-based eating now that, one of our aims, sort of me and Daisy in doing our own podcast, is that we want to have a healthy generation of the next generations of vegans. We don't want them popping up in any studies as being deficient in anything. And so we're really, making sure that that information is out there. It is out there. You just need to pay a little bit of attention to it when you're starting out, and then it gets really easy. You'll go way over your protein requirement.
Which is really good to know. And I suppose with a vegan diet and being so varied and having to maybe look at, a lot of alternatives, vegetables, fruits, new plants that you may not have ever heard of before, is it right in saying that you're actually going to find new minerals and nutrients that perhaps you wouldn't have had beforehand?
Well, I think the biggest one that we see as, coming up as being deficient in general practice, you'll never see it deficient in a vegan, which is, well, it's basically something called folate, which if you're deficient in it, it's another way of becoming anemic. So your bone marrow won't function properly and you won't make enough red blood cells. But folate in the blood is made by folic acid that we get in the diet. And the main sources are things like, nuts, seeds, green vegetables, all kinds of fruits. And it's only people that are really eating sort of very processed meat-based diets that end up coming in and you check it and it's a little bit on the low side. And the first thing I do is I send them a text to say, are you having enough green leafy vegetables and fruits and things? Because it looks like maybe you're not, because your folate has come up low on the blood. I mean, that's the main one. I don't know, Daisy, are there any other ones that pop into your head that you sort of feel particularly great that we have on a vegan diet?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can get all our nutrients through a vegan diet really easily. And I think it's about planning it, as Claire said. But I think the key thing about the nutrients in a vegan diet is fruits and vegetables and whole grains are so full of antioxidants. And these are really anti-inflammatory. So they are very health-promoting foods, not just for runners, but for everybody. And I think that's one of the key benefits, actually, of a whole food plant-based diet, is how anti-inflammatory it is.
It's really encouraging, especially from a sports perspective. I know a lot of runners kind of when they research vegan diet, they know that they might recover faster because of the anti-inflammatory properties. But even if you're not a runner, there's going to be benefits to more fruits and vegetables, isn't there? In maybe, other kinds of issues and diseases that maybe a bit more, widely spread. You want to say something that on this, I can feel it.
Well, because I think the sort of the running script at the moment is, we don't have a deficiency of protein. We have a deficiency of fiber. And, fiber it's only in plants. If you ask other healthcare professionals that haven't looked at nutrition, you know, how much fibre is in chicken, how much fibre is in meat, how much fibre is in dairy, they'll look at you for a long time. And it's not often that they'll say, well, it's zero. But it's of course, when you're eating loads of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, you're getting that, well, something that's going to be above the recommended 30 grams of fibre a day. Whereas if you are not following that kind of diet, you're going to find that it's basically, you know, are you going to be the 1 in 10 in the UK that's eating enough fibre, or are you going to be one of the other 9? And that's another thing that I say to people, because people always say that they eat loads of fruit and vegetables, and it's really hard to find, you know, the person who would, you know, that they're a 9 out of 10. But people never identify themselves as such. And if you don't eat enough fibre, it's your main waste system. So one of the main waste systems, as you get older, it contributes to kind of build-up of toxins and things like that, because the faster your transit time, the better it is for you. And so that's one of the things that I think in general practice, we really see a lot of people with constipation, and Daisy's probably going to laugh here because I do talk about this a lot, but it's because it's so frustrating when you know that there's a really easy fix, and it's just, you know, moving to a more whole food diet, and then you'll fix that without taking any of the laxatives that are on the market.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I would also say that you mentioned, Claire, we see a lot of people with constipation in primary care, but you know, what we do see a lot of, Laura, is cardiovascular disease, so heart attack, stroke, prematurely, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension, so high blood pressure, as well as cancers. These are our top, 3 or 4 major causes of both mortality, premature mortality, but also what we call morbidity, so living in poor health. And we know that big studies, so prospective cohort studies, have shown that we can reduce the risk of all of these big killers. Cardiovascular disease will reduce by 25% on a whole food plant-based diet, type 2 diabetes by 50%, and hypertension by 60%. These numbers are huge. It's incredible.
Is it fair to say, maybe a bit of a generalization here, but if you're eating, a diet that is heavy on animal-based products, you're getting a lot of your calories through meat, dairy, and therefore that's why you're not getting enough fibre, and maybe you're not getting enough folate, which you discussed earlier on. Is it because a lot of people, maybe it's convenience, I don't know if that's quite correct, but because they're eating meat, they're eating dairy, it's filling them up, so therefore the fruit and veg kind of takes a back seat, whereas obviously if you're following a vegan diet, it's up front and centre, and you have to eat the fruits, the veg, the pulses. So you're getting those vitamins without really thinking about it. Perhaps people that eat an animal-based diet think that they're getting enough because they feel full, but they're full on the wrong things.
Oh, 100%. I would agree. I mean, I was an omnivore until the age of 40, so I feel quite ashamed to say that now. I really wish I had transitioned sooner. But absolutely, you think that you're eating healthy. I did. But when you really drill down, as you say, you're filling your plate with meat, which is actually not only deficient in fibre, but does contain other things that we know now that can lead to potential disease. So things like heme iron and various other things, which we can go on to if you want the details. But absolutely agree with you. I think it takes a while, doesn't it, to transition to knowing what to eat instead of the meat that you're so used to. Perhaps most of us were brought up eating meat. I certainly was. And it took me a lot of education and understanding of how to replace that in my diet.
You just mentioned there, Daisy, heme iron. So again, we hear a lot, don't we, about our, red meat in particular. It's a great source of iron. Maybe if you're a bodybuilder, you're looking to strength train or you want to get faster, we'll say, oh, you need high iron levels. That's really good for you. Red meat's brilliant. But now there's kind of this knowledge, this shift to say, well, actually, it's a different type of iron, and we need to be more educated on what kind of iron we're getting in our meat. Could you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, iron's really important for everyone, particularly for your audience of runners, and I'll explain why. So iron's a mineral. Iron deficiency is the most common nutrient deficiency in the world. So having an iron deficiency is not specific to being plant-based or having a vegan diet. In fact, plant-based eaters do intake a similar or higher quantity of iron than omnivores. And why is iron important? Well, it's important because it helps us produce red blood cells and hemoglobin. That's the protein that carries oxygen to all our tissues, including the muscles that power us when we're running. So, if you are low in iron and hemoglobin, you'll feel quite tired, you might feel breathless. This might affect your running performance. I know that's important to your audience. So it's important to make sure we get enough iron. Before we go on to how easy it is to get plant-based sources of iron and heme iron and non-heme iron, what I would say at this point is if someone does think they're iron deficient or they've been diagnosed with an iron deficiency anemia, it's really important to talk to your healthcare provider because there could be many reasons for it, including more serious medical conditions. So these need to be excluded first before you look at your diet on its own. But yes, the good news is that iron is really easily readable in plant-based foods. And it comes in that non-heme iron form that we were talking about. And the really good examples would be dark leafy vegetables, legumes, so pulses, nuts, seeds, whole grains. And, despite having similar or higher intakes of iron than omnivores, we may have lower iron stores. And that's because the absorption of this non-heme iron is not as efficient as heme iron. So people might think, oh gosh, is this a problem? I don't want my iron stores to go down. Actually, it's not a problem. It's actually an advantage because we now know that non-heme iron, which we find in meat, for example, can cause oxidative stress. It's associated with inflammation. And this really increases the risk of all those chronic diseases I mentioned earlier, Laura, that we see in primary care, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. So actually, as plant-based eaters eating non-heme iron, we're reducing those risks and we're still getting the iron that we need. We just need to be cautious about the absorption. So to maximize our absorption of this really excellent source of non-heme iron, there's a few tips and tricks, and Claire and I always talk about it. And they're simple things, avoiding things like tea and coffee with your meals because that can affect the absorption of iron, or adding a little bit of vitamin C in your diet because that increases the absorption. And by that we mean just perhaps, a glass of orange juice with your meals, or, a drizzle of lemon juice, or combining things like citrus fruits or some vegetables that are high in vitamin C. Good ones would be things like bell peppers or even broccoli with your iron sources that can help the absorption. So yeah, absolutely. Iron is really important for runners and for everyone. And it's very easy to obtain on a plant-based diet.
Would you say, as GPs and, working with general public, that a lot of the way forward is in education and educating your patients and the wider population about, what is actually in our food? I mean, we just talked there about iron, in meat, which historically people have thought is the best way to get it. And now we're learning that actually it might not be the best way. And, we kind of flip things on its head. We have to be quite careful, don't we, about where we get our knowledge from in terms of dietary requirements. And I can imagine that you really feel that you want to educate your patients a lot more about what goes into their meals.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely want to educate our colleagues probably first in terms of some of the biases that are out there against things like, ability to get iron in a vegan diet. And that's because, when you work in medicine, you see other people's notes, you see letters from specialists. If somebody's gone in with a hip fracture or something like that, there might be a comment about whether the person eats a lot of dairy, or there might be a note from a colleague about, somebody who's come in and been found to have anemia. There might be a note there which says, doesn't eat a lot of red meat, and you know that they've had a conversation where they've said, oh, maybe you should have some more red meat. So for our colleagues, it's really about getting them to ask the question if they find an anemia, obviously not withstanding what Daisy said about making sure that you look for causes other than diet, but that you ask, do you eat dark greens, vegetables, pulses, beans, nuts and seeds, or do you have a fortified breakfast cereal, for example? And, if you're eating meals, are you having a citrus fruit with it, or are you having a cup of tea and coffee, which might not be so helpful? And so, the job sometimes is starting with the health professionals and then sort of looking at, well, how much do the public really need to know about food? Well, they need to know a lot when we're in a situation where people are living in, areas that maybe don't have shops that are really pushing fruit and vegetables, and they're pushing a lot of processed foods. So where people are sort of, their only chance of having a healthy diet is being able to make the right choices. But sometimes I think, if I think about myself as a child and, I didn't grow up from the beginning as a vegetarian, and how much I just sort of disliked fruit and vegetables because there was always something tastier to eat. And when you're a child, if you've got a cupboard of Mr. Kipling cakes, or your mum says, if you're hungry, have an apple, you want the cake or you want the crisps. And so, it's not just about knowing what to eat. It's so much about, what do we do in terms of, food regulation and policies that just make it easier to make the right choices without thinking about it too much.
I think we can all remember a time, can't we, when, have an orange for pudding, or you
feel hungry.
And I think, I think as a child, I definitely would have gone for the Mr. Kipling as well.
Yeah.
Now, just moving on, and I suppose referencing your point there about health professionals needing to be educated further. I saw it was on the Lorraine show the other morning. Heather Mills was actually on. She's a vegan, and she was talking about how a vegan diet had really, cured her, well, not cured her, but, really healed her after her amputation, and how that diet had really, just had so many benefits for her. And then they brought in Dr. Hilary Jones, and he said, oh yeah, absolutely brilliant. Plant-based food is the way we need to be going more. And then he said, however, you must be careful because you might become, you then might not have enough vitamin B12 in your diet. And I thought, oh, there's another one we hear a lot, isn't it, about plant-based diets and you're not getting enough B12. What do you say to that response?
Well, I think that's one of the, just to take a step back from that and think about Hilary Jones and his intervention there. That's one of the most dangerous sort of gaslighting comments that somebody could make, which is, oh, I really support your diet. And then it's that, but be careful, because it's the be careful that really sits with us, doesn't it? That we're really taking a risk. But obviously, B12 is both, there are always two things I want to say about this. And I guess I have to say the first thing is, if you're vegan or you're moving towards that sort of diet, but you're not there yet, just start taking B12, start taking it as a supplement. Don't, at this point, we can come on to, whether supplements are necessary or natural or not. But when it comes to B12 is so important for, for our nerves, for all the cells in our bodies, that it's just not worth trying to see whether you can get it because you're having enough fortified breakfast cereal, or you've actually got the yeast flakes with B12 added, and kind of get away with it in that way. You might be able to, but you're not going to be getting it from the whole foods themselves, because B12 is essentially, it's a vitamin that's made by microorganisms in the soil. There's no denying that there's a certain amount in meat and fish and eggs, but most of the time that is coming from the fact the animals themselves have been supplemented to give you a food source that contains it, and so that animal can survive. We're not eating unwashed fruit and vegetables. We're not coming into contact with the soil. So the supplement, where we've gone from a world where we're thriving rather than just surviving until the age of 35 or 40, we need to take that B12. And the older you are, with all things, the gut doesn't work as well in absorbing things. So, particularly for the elderly, it's really important. And you can either do a daily supplement, which is something like just a 10 microgram a day supplement. But then there is this thing about if you don't remember to take supplements very often and you end up taking them, just once a week on a Saturday or something, then you need to take a much higher dose. And so you'll look at the weekly supplement and you'll look at the tablet and you'll be like, oh my gosh, it's 2,000 micrograms. Am I going to overdose on this? And you're not, because it's diminishing returns. When you take the higher dose, you won't absorb as much. So you can do it either way. You can do it daily or weekly, but note that the dosing is very different. It's many times higher that you need to take it if you're just going to do it weekly. And coming back to all the things that Daisy said earlier, taking that supplement is a really small price to pay for the avoidance of all the things that you're avoiding, cardiovascular disease, diabetes risk, through cutting out things like red meat in your diet. So, I really don't see it as a big price to pay to remember to do that. It's really easy, and it's not worth taking the chance of not doing it. In the beginning, if you've just switched from an omnivorous diet, you will have stores. So you might not get symptoms straight away and you might think you're doing okay. But certainly vegans that are taking the supplement, they don't run into problems with B12, whereas people who have become very unhealthy and in their, say, 60s, 70s, they're diabetic, they take certain drugs. There's a drug called metformin that is the most common drug used to treat diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And there are things like people get a lot of reflux if they're on, if they're eating meat and things like that. It's much less common in vegans, incidentally. If you get a lot of reflux, sometimes you take these acid blocking tablets called PPIs or proton pump inhibitors, and omeprazole is the name of one that people might have heard of. And if you take those and you cut down your stomach acid, you're even less likely to absorb iron and B12. So that's another thing that gets picked up on people's, diabetes checks and things like that in general practice.
So actually, it's safe to say then that anybody could be B12 deficient, whether or not they're vegan or omnivorous. It just depends on what you're eating and perhaps your age and if you're on any medication.
Yeah.
So take a supplement.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think in America, they recommend everyone over the age of 50 for those reasons Claire mentioned. But, we've clarified B12. What I just wanted to go back on briefly is the nutritional education that you mentioned with reference to medical professionals. And what I'd like to say on that is we actually don't get that much nutritional education at medical school. The curriculum is huge. So, we have to be taught about every illness, every treatment, every side effect, etc. So preventative medicine, and in particular nutritional medicine, is actually a very, very small part of the curriculum. So unless a doctor or a healthcare professional has an interest in it, they may really only know the basics, which is unfortunately the way the system is right now. Is we're treating disease. We are firefighting in the NHS. The focus is on treating the sick, unfortunately, rather than preventing disease as such. But the good news is, and if your listeners are interested, we are part of an organisation called the Plant-Based Health Professionals. We're a UK-based organisation that was founded by a consultant haematologist in the NHS who still works in the NHS now, Dr. Shireen Kassam. And, we both have received a lot of education, and there's courses and material online regarding plant-based nutrition. If people are interested, I'd definitely recommend they check out that resource.
And you actually don't have to be a health professional to subscribe to plant-based professionals either, do you? You can, as a lay person, subscribe and get some really brilliant resources and information.
Exactly.
If you're interested in that. Absolutely. That's brilliant point. So it must be really frustrating for both of you, knowing that you're firefighting essentially. and that, there's so many ways, very simple ways, I suppose, that all these diseases could be prevented rather than cured. What do you see most commonly, coming into your practice? What are the issues that you think, we really could very easily prevent so much of this, and yet it's just not happening yet?
Claire, do you want to take this one, or shall I?
Yeah, I can. I think there might be a bit of repetition here. So the first one that we would say is, and I think some of your listeners might have heard of a cardiologist called Dr. Kim Williams, and I was listening to him on a podcast. I'll start with him because he's obviously plant-based and was I think former president of the American Cardiology Society, and he basically said we could get rid of 90 to 95% of cardiologists if everybody ate a plant-based diet. That is incredible, because what he's saying is the vast majority of heart disease has got nothing to do with things that you're born with or things that your genes determine. It's all to do with how you eat. And so that's basically coronary artery disease. So that's where you have a buildup of fats and cholesterol in your circulation. It affects the main arteries. I'm going to say this on this podcast because I think it will influence a lot of people. But the early event might be men getting problems with erections, because the arteries, obviously to the penis, are affected first because they're more narrow. And then a later warning sign might be that massive heart attack. So that's the first thing. So all stages of coronary artery disease, hypertension, could be improved with a plant-based diet. Then the thing that Daisy was mentioning, I think we had a study recently that said that if you go from the sort of worst type of diet to the best type of diet, you can reduce your risk of diabetes by something like 40 to 60%. And nobody wants to have diabetes and all the effects of that. Then we talked about the cancers that come in. And, you never want to say, it's your fault that you got cancer because of your diet. And it's something much more complicated than that. But again, certain cancers are going to be to do with your genes. But even where you've got genes that make you more likely, say, to develop something like bowel cancer, you can get your risk back to the general population through changing your diet. So this is really important stuff. Those are the main ones. But the more minor things that people, the things that people notice more. So nobody comes in sort of saying, well, they don't usually come in sort of saying, I think I'm getting close to have a heart attack. They come in and they say, I've got a lot of pain in my tummy, and they're suffering from things like reflux. We know that's better if you increase the fibre in your diet. Constipation, I've already mentioned.
Oh, I knew you would say constipation.
I'm so sorry, I had to come back to it. But, these are the things that people come in and complain about. Hemorrhoids, again, straining on the toilet. What I'm thinking, I was in general practice, just yesterday. And I think if I think through the things that I saw, there was absolutely loads of that kind of thing. Obesity, vegans tend to have lower BMIs, less problem with controlling their weight. And then the things that come with obesity is, again, mostly people don't come in and have a consultation about their weight. What they come in and they have a consultation about their bad knee pain due to osteoarthritis, where we know that if people carry less weight, they're going to be able to use their joints less painfully and for longer.
There's a lot to be said for a plant-based diet, isn't there?
Yeah.
So maybe if I come to you, Daisy, now and just, ask, why is it when it's relatively simple in real terms to just eat a healthier diet, a plant-based diet? Why aren't more people doing it? What do you think is the reason that prevents so many people eating better?
Oh gosh, Laura, it's a simple question, but I'm not sure there's a simple answer. I really wish there was, and it's something I've been banging my head against the wall, at least I feel like I have, because once you read the studies, And, from a health perspective, there is no doubt it's better for us. And then, you look at the environmental perspective, and then you think there's no doubt it's better for the planet and climate change and all of that we're worried about. And then we haven't talked even about the ethical considerations of being vegan, which, when you look at that and you look at what happens to the, 80 billion land animals that are being killed every year, and the conditions they go through in awful conditions. So you look at everything, you think, it's so simple. Why aren't people doing it? And I particularly like the work of Dr. Melanie Joy. She's a vegan social psychologist, and she talks about how we are brought up, we are raised in thinking or believing that eating animals, she calls it the 3 N's, that eating animals is normal, it's natural, and it's necessary. And look, even as a healthcare professional, as a GP, I believe that until the age of 40. I mean, I feel, as I said before, I feel ashamed to say it. But we don't stop to think, really. We just eat it because that's what we were brought up with, that's what we're used to. And yeah, something needs to happen for you just to stop for a minute and take those blinkers off, I guess. Do your research, whatever it takes. But those 3 N's are really important, because I personally don't think it's normal anymore to eat animals, particularly to eat dairy from them, as well as obviously eating animals. It's certainly not necessary. And as far as natural is concerned, honestly, it's far from it. So I think it's a big question, Laura, and I don't know what the answer is. And I think it will take time, and I think it will take a lot of education, as you say, and we just need to keep talking about the benefits and help people transition, because people are used to certain foods and they enjoy the foods they eat. But what I found when I transitioned is how abundant and delicious a plant-based diet is. I enjoy my food so much more than I used to, and that's really what I want to get across to both my colleagues and my patients. It doesn't have to be a boring salad. It isn't. It's fantastic diet, lifestyle, in fact. So yeah, long answer. Sorry about that.
No, and I agree. I don't know what the answer is. I'm yet to find the answer. It sounds like a simple question, but it's certainly not a simple answer. And I know a lot of people, yourselves included, have said, I feel embarrassed maybe that I came to this so late in life. I was saying I've been vegan 8 odd years now, and I always think, God, why didn't I do it sooner? And that's the thing with veganism, isn't it? Everybody that's gone vegan has said, my eyes were blinkered. I had no idea. Why didn't I do it sooner? And it's not about feeling guilty from here on. You've got to say, right, I made that change, and I'm not going to make other people feel guilty about their choices now, but we want to help them see, and we want to help them make that change without being preachy. So we've talked about a lot of the kind of the health issues that people have when they're not on a plant-based diet. Let's kind of talk a little bit about how people can start on that journey, and maybe what are some really good things that they can start off doing, maybe some small habits that they can do early on to kind of get them on the way. Maybe if I start with you, Claire, and see if you've got any helpful hints for people who are looking to transition to a plant-based diet, what would you recommend?
Well, I think it's obviously, I'm going to say, in sort of in reference to the question that we've just discussed, really, that we want to create a new normal, which is not eating animals. And I think the thing that puts people off most is the idea that, it's going to alienate them from other people, and it's going to make life difficult, or even that people are going to look at them and think, what's wrong with you? Why do you have to be like this? Why are you being like this? And I think, so when you think about where to start, it's often things like actually thinking, well, okay, it's not just about cutting out meat. It's about learning, what do I like eating for protein instead of meat? Mm-hmm. And that might be getting to know one of our favourite foods, which is tofu, which is, it ticks all the boxes. It doesn't have saturated fat. It's high in protein. and you can cook it in so many different ways. And you might try it once and think, I don't like it, but it might just be the way that it was cooked. It might not have been with the right flavors. So it's maybe taking something that you like, say with chicken, and using tofu instead, because it's a really good thing to get into your diet. I often talk to people about, making swaps for beef mince, and how you've got corn, which from what I understand, I don't personally eat corn, but I think it tastes very similar to mince, as do a lot of the textured vegetable proteins. Or you could just say, if you're really feeling adventurous, you could replace it with something like lentils. And often when I've made things for colleagues, say like a moussaka, and I've used green lentils instead of a beef mince, as long as it's got like the red wine taste that they're expecting and the cinnamon, the spices, they love it. So so start with maybe thinking about your protein and what swaps you might make. That would be the first place that I would start with.
Daisy, do you have any recommendations? Similar question.
I think as Claire mentioned, and look at alternatives. So there is a lot now available. It's become a lot easier, hasn't it, to transition now than it was, say, 5, 10, or even longer than that. So go to your supermarkets and look at the shelves that you wouldn't necessarily look at. So soya, again, as Claire said, is a minimally processed food, and soya yogurts and soya milks are a really excellent way to transition away from dairy. So that would be my tip.
Good tip. Now, I don't know about you two, but when I first transitioned to a plant-based diet, I found that I was pretty hungry and quite a lot of the time. And I don't think, looking back now, I don't think I was eating enough calories, to sustain, my activity levels. And obviously I was previously eating animal products, which are, calorific. And I wasn't kind of, maybe eating enough to cover off what I needed. I suppose what I'm going to ask you is, do we need to stick to that, breakfast, lunch, dinner? Or when you're transitioning, is it a good idea actually to kind of just eat a lot more than you think you need? Maybe if I start with you, Daisy.
Okay. Yes. So generally, plant-based foods do tend to be lower in calorie density. This is true. So in a way, I suppose that is a good thing, because it means you can eat more. So you can fill your plates. Claire loves talking about massive, big portions. And that's great. You don't have to be hungry on a plant-based diet. Most of us would say it's really helped us control our weight and, not have to be on a diet. Both myself and Claire are in that sort of age range where the menopause is approaching or has approached. So people put on weight, and, you find on a plant-based diet that you don't do as much as others. So that is a real advantage of having foods that are nutrient dense but are lower in density of calories. But you're right, if you're an athlete or you're younger and you do need higher requirements, then do focus on the certain foods that are a bit more calorie dense. As Claire mentioned, things like nuts and seeds would be a really good source. Nut spreads, for example, almonds, butter, peanut butter, these sorts of things. So Claire, do you have anything else to add on?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the way that we're telling people to do plant-based diets, which is with the focus on the whole foods, it's mostly, tackling people's problems maybe with being overweight. But if I think about when I went first vegan, which was so many years ago, in the late 80s, my diet was hilarious, because actually, I thought that B12 was in brewer's yeast. I don't actually think it is, but I used to take brewer's yeast, and then I think the only thing that saved me was I used to eat absolutely loads of breakfast cereal, and it was fortified, and so you get all your iron and your vitamins from that. And I had that with soya milk. And I was actually overweight because I was a processed food vegan. I ate a lot of beans on toast and peanut butter on toast and things like that as well. But actually, I was eating like some kind of athlete in terms of my carb requirements. And I remember meeting a vegan at a party, which was a really, really rare event. And, you know, somebody said to me, oh, there's another vegan over there. And I saw him, and he was really thin, and he didn't look too good. He probably wasn't taking B12 either. And he did that thing where he actually looked me up and down and said, you're vegan, because I was too big for a vegan. So, you know, I think I can tell people how to keep their weight up if they need to. And it does go down that you don't have to stick to 3 meals a day. If you're doing a lot of exercise, you know, have a late night bowl of cereal. Why not have some extra, you know, oat groats with fruits or something like that? And you know, you don't need to be losing weight if you don't want to.
Yeah. It's quite freeing, actually, that knowledge, I think. And for a lot of people who maybe struggle with the idea that they might be eating less food, it's actually quite the opposite. I mean, I know from my own, you know, personal experiences, I love eating. Like, I couldn't imagine not eating lots all the time. It's what I do.
Yeah.
Probably why I started running. So it's great to know that, do you know what? If you want to eat something right now, you know, in between breakfast and lunch, it's absolutely fine. Just be very mindful of what you're eating, you know, and just get the calories in. It's fine, isn't it? Nothing's going to happen. You're not going to implode. So for me, that's heartening to know that we don't need to stick to that kind of traditional breakfast, lunch, dinner if we feel that we're needing extra in between.
I'd also say if you struggle to eat bigger portions, then, and you are exercising, you know, think about the exercise, because the classic one is, you know, the knowledge that going for a swim seems to make people put on weight. And it's something around the fact that, yes, you may have a swim and you may burn some calories, but when you come out of that pool, you're looking for the hot chocolate machine, or, you know, you really feel like you could eat something. And so, you know, it's not the case that always that exercising will make you lose weight if you change things up a bit and you're trying to increase your appetite.
There is definitely something about a swimming pool that for some reason just makes you want to eat all the food when you get out. I've never quite understood that. It doesn't seem to happen in the same way with any other sport, but water, getting out to the swimming pool always, straight to the vending machine.
It's scientifically proven that you'll put on weight through swimming, and that's what's so. But it's such a heart sink when you have the patient with the really bad knees and they can't really do weight bearing exercise and they're overweight, and you've talked to them about diet and they haven't really been able to make any changes, and they come in and they say to you, "Oh, doctor, you know, I've started swimming," and I go, "Oh, good." But really, I'm thinking, oh no, you know, you're going to find it really challenging now, you know, not to have your snacks.
That's it, isn't it? You know, the swimming that you thought might, you know, get your weight in check is actually doing completely opposite. You two, do you run? Am I right in saying that you do run? Both of you?
Yeah. You do, Laura.
Yeah, great. Is there a preferred distance for you? I'll ask you, Daisy, first of all. What's your favourite event?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. So I've gone from being quite an ambitious runner, sort of doing races and chasing times, to now just being a social runner, to be honest. I love running with my 2 running friends, and it's just a time for us to catch up. I mean, we talk the whole way through. My husband always says, "You're obviously not running fast enough if you can keep talking as you are." But yeah, no, it's become much more of a stress reliever, you know, mental health. It helps me balance. Yeah, I just feel great running. I absolutely love running. And I don't really do races anymore, so I don't have a preferred distance. But we tend to run about 10K 4-5 times a week. And so, yeah, that's... and Claire's doing the races now, though, aren't you, Claire?
Yes, I've got a half marathon coming up, and I feel like I have to tell you that I'm Isle of Wight bronze cross country champion in my age category. But there is a story.
Awesome.
Yes, and that's what everyone says. But no one was more surprised than me, and I accepted the medal. But when I looked on the results sheet, I was actually bronze out of 3 in my age category. So I always say, for me, it's just about getting round. You've got to be in it to win it.
You're my kind of runner. I once remember I had
a team of us did one of these backyard ultras where you do as many loops as possible. And anyway, it came to the end of the event. We'd run however many miles between us, and they announced that we'd come first place ladies. Well, our jaws absolutely hit the floor, and probably like you, I think there were 2 ladies teams. Everybody else had done it as individuals. So, but we took it, and we'll say, it doesn't matter how you do it. If you do it, then you're a winner in my book. So I think that's amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both on the podcast today. I feel like I've learned actually heaps myself. So I'm sure that the listeners will take away so much from this. Thank you both for sharing your knowledge with me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Daisy and Claire.
You're welcome. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to leave a review for the Vegan Fitness Runner podcast. Please subscribe if you don't want to miss an episode, and remember you can find out more about all my guests and further information on all the topics covered over on the website veganfitnessrunner.com. Thanks again, and bye for now.